Okay, so my name is Ryan, and today I'll be talking about the project that I work for, the Equity, Disproportionality, and Design Project. And the mission of our project is to prevent disproportionality in schools so that all students can reach their full potential. I'll be sharing about our awareness, action, and scale framework, and then we're going to be making that framework concrete by introducing the latest addition to our services, which is the Equity Dispro Data System. Okay, so ED&D are a small but really close team. Our project is led by Russell Coronado, and I've got three other teammates and collaborators, Marcus Jackson, Olivia Rivera, and Adrian Batista. And I want to do spend our time together in four parts. So the first is that I want to share the basic idea of the ED&D project. And then next, we're going to look at how our project turns these ideas into action. Next, after that, we'll look at how we collaborate with other SELPAs. And then finally, we'll give the most concrete example yet of these ideas by introducing the EDDIES project. But first, let's start with the idea. So when we talk about disproportionality in California schools, most of us go right to one of a few main metrics that the CDE, the California Department of Ed, measures. And those are who's identified for special ed, discipline events like suspension and expulsion, and the amount of time that students with disabilities spend in the general ed setting. And so disproportionality happens, of course, when these outcomes are different for some racial subgroups compared to others. And in fact, our team does spend a lot of time thinking about these three metrics. But we also know that when we think of who's actually doing the change work, so that's the teachers and the service providers, parents, and the community, we need to be able to speak to a much wider audience. And so we organize our work using a framework. Okay, so let me do one more check here because I'm seeing a message from Robin. Your slide does not show this. Y'all should see a slide of community members gathered around a table with Post-its on it. Can somebody give me a cue and let me know that that's what you're seeing or not? Oh, you are. Great. Okay, so I'm going to keep it. Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so let's talk about the framework. The framework is awareness, action, and scale. So let's just sort of break down what this means for us. Let's build awareness about disproportionality so that we have a common language to talk about it. Let's build tools for action so that we can turn our belief in equity into results for students. And then finally, let's scale this work by connecting SELPAs with each other in a disproportionality prevention network. And so if we take all of the deliverables from our original design for this grant, we organize them into this framework, it looks something like this. The original sort of proposal of the grant project, we had 9 community design deliverables. These have evolved since then through year 1. But you could see that under each of these work strands, awareness, action, and scale, they have 3, they each have 3 of their own community design projects, one of which is the EDDIES data tool, which we'll be sharing in a few minutes. Okay, but the framework doesn't do the work on its own. It's just a framework. And so for that, we have to turn these ideas into real things. And so next, we're going to look at a recent example of some of the work that we've done, and that's our disproportionality data literacy training. The purpose of the data literacy training that ED&D provides is to create a safe place for people to learn how to talk about disproportionality data. The training is about 2 hours long, and we learn about risk ratio scores. We learn about how to talk about them person to person, and as opposed to person to machine or machine to person. And we use scenarios to practice what it's like to share that data at meetings. In the research phase of developing this content, we learned that there's a whole lot of people who don't know how to interpret this data, but they're not saying anything because they think that they're the only ones. And really what we learned, the big lesson for us is that they're not the only ones. There's a lot of people who feel like this. And so knowing that and learning about that happening in our educator community, we've designed this training to be a place where everybody feels like they can ask the questions that they have. So we work really hard to sort of build that mood and vibe to the training so that everybody feels safe. After every session, we sit down for a formal meeting with our evaluator, Shannon, and we outline the changes for the next iteration. And we believe that is that iterative process that has expanded the data literacy training to include additional products that seem to resonate with people. So I'm just going to preview a couple of those. The first one is a post-session workbook for practicing computation of risk ratio scores. So one thing that we learned from folks is that there's a lot of interest in learning the math of risk ratio scores. That was something that I was super surprised by, but we are we're a responsive and data informed shop. So when we got enough of that feedback, we built more of that into our training. And then also knowing that a lot of this stuff can be tough to grasp the first time around, we built this workbook for folks to use. And we'll be sharing this workbook today also. In fact, Adrian, if you have a moment, can you please just drop a link to the workbook so the folks can have that? Later on, I'll walk you through what one of these activities is like. That way you can get a feel for it, and then you can sort of take that with you. Okay, so the second thing, I'll just show you a couple of more things. We'll go through, I have a little section later on where we can talk more about this, but this is like a page out of the workbook where we show an actual disproportionality report, and we teach folks how to identify how all the parts of the risk ratio score are computed and where to find them on the report, and then how to reproduce that score. The second thing that we learned about is that there's a lot of learning that can happen outside of a formal training. In fact, it does quite a bit. And so we've had a couple of SELPAs contact us after our trainings just saying, hey, we've got more questions and we just want to sit down around the table or in the Zoom room and figure out how to do this better and how to turn this data into action. Would you be willing to do that? And it turns out there's a lot of learning that can happen in a format like that. It's less formal than a training and sort of more customized to the conversation that people want to have. And so we are trialing a service that we're calling the ED&D Data Connections, where we do this type of kind of small group consultation with SELPAs based on their needs. We have done something as structured as like a 4-week sprint where we meet once a week and sort of work towards the goal of building out a disproportionality presentation. And then we've done other things that are just far less formal, where folks just say, I'm trying to compute this risk ratio score, not getting the correct answer. Can we sit down and figure that out? And so we try to tailor this to what it is that folks need. Okay, I'm gonna take just a quick break here and just have a look at the, see if we have any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any. All right, so that's our data literacy training and just generally kind of giving you a sense of how our related service around the Eddie's data tools look. And I hope by now that you've noticed a theme with our work, and that theme is that we really like working with people. We do also like working with data, but we find that these two things are more connected than we often give it credit for. And so collaboration has become an essential part of how we do our work. And we especially like creating collaborative opportunities where they haven't existed for us before. And all of this makes sense to us. I think intuitively, we know that it's not going to happen for kids unless we start making connections where they didn't exist before. And so we take collaboration pretty seriously and we try to be as intentional as we can about it. So let's look at some of the ways that we do that. One thing that we've learned is that if you want to collaborate, you've got to find something to collaborate around. You can't just sort of get together and expect collaboration to happen. And so the idea that we experimented was a fairly simple one. We wanted to create a routine for activities and then build a network around each of those activities so that collaboration can then become a part of that routine. We've got 4 examples just really quickly I'll show you. The first is we co-design presentations with folks. So we're doing this with the SELPA improvement leads right now, where we're collaborating on some training materials together. But we'll also often have slides that tell the stories of other collaborators. And so we work with them to put the slides together and sort of feel our way around the best execution of these presentations so they connect with an audience. So that's the first way. The second is when we're not sure about what to collaborate on, we've discovered that if we just meet regularly with folks once a month or once a quarter, and we just share openly about the work that we're doing, then the opportunities for collaboration just naturally come up. And so we kind of think of this as the discovery phase. We just essentially meet, and usually by the second or third meeting, some really great idea comes up. So that's sort of another routine that we have. There's another routine for collaboration that we have that is about building our team's capacity in all kinds of different areas, design thinking. One of our favorite collaborations is with the Strategic Data Project, which is at the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard. And they help us, advise us on things like the algorithm for the data tool, but also other more human things like data ethics and data governance and that type of thing. And then of course we have our wonderful partnership with CodeStack Academy to help scale our data tool up. Last one I'll talk about is just getting feedback. So any presentation, including this one, goes through a number of iterative phases, and we have learned that the best people to put our content in front of as we build it are the actual audience themselves. And so we have SELPAs who have become very accustomed, and LEAs even have become very accustomed to us calling them and saying, we have some content we're developing, would you mind having a look at it? Here's what we want you to feel. Did you feel that way? And then we sort of, go from there. Much of our content is, almost all of our content has been through a number of different audiences and rounds of feedback before they actually get in front of the official audience themselves. So here's what all that collaboration looks like in real life. So let's just go from theory to actual sort of like what this looks like. And this is a photograph of one of our design workshops. Those are parents up there with my teammate Olivia presenting on their prototype that they built at that design workshop. And then this photograph, also one of my favorites, an illustration of perhaps the most important part of this, which is the community design teams actually building the ideas and bringing them to life. All right, so we know that collaboration is important. We also know that we need activities to collaborate around, but how do we get there, and what does it look like when we do? So we've learned that we have to ask a really important question when we begin a collaboration with a partner, and that is, how can we reimagine the deliverables that we make so it supports a collaborator's mission? And that's really where the creativity comes up, is sort of melding that mission with our mission with a collaborator's mission. Our work with Shasta SELPA is a great example of this. We've had a few conversations with Shasta earlier in the school year, and what we learned is that we shared a common interest around researching and discovering themes for conversation across many agencies. So what that looks like for us is we're constantly listening for new insights about how SELPAs in California are talking about disproportionality. And Shasta has a very similar thing happening, but they are wondering about that question across their 20+ LEAs. So we teamed up with Jeremy Sautel and Nick Sirist to design an empathy interview research project. And the hope is that the common insights that we learn from these empathy interviews will be the foundation for their relationships that are necessary for sustained equity work in the Shasta area. And I think Jeremy put it best when he said that we can't go into these conversations as strangers. These conversations are tough. Like, we have to be together and have some sort of common cause and relationship before we can do that. We do this in a consultative model. So we collaborate with Jeremy and Nick to build the interview research plan. And Nick and Jeremy have conducted those interviews in the past few weeks, and now we are collaborating again to find the themes and the insights that happen across those interviews. And then those themes and insights will be developed into their equity work, including how they talk about it with their LEAs, presentation materials, and things like that. And we're super excited to see how that develops, and we'll be telling that more of that story as it unfolds. So recently, the other thing, Shasta is one of the first participants in our data connection service, and we're doing a sort of a 4-week kind of routine with them where we work on getting into eddies, how to interpret it, and then how to share that data. Here's a picture of us doing the work. Okay, so I'm excited about the things that we could do together with your SELPA. And so one thing that we're always wondering is, what's your vision for supporting students with disabilities, and how can we help your community win? And so I want to close this section on collaboration with a call to action for all of us, which is to take some time to reflect on what kinds of innovative, creative, and impactful collaborations can we engage in together. And this is a genuinely exciting conversation for us. One of the most fun and exciting things about this work is discovering ways that we can work together that we just hadn't thought of. I'm not kidding when I say that anything that I've done in education that I'm proud of, I haven't done by myself. It's always been with other people, and that's, that's a core value for us. And we believe that the best ideas come when we sort of put a bunch of different ideas together.
Ryan, before you move on, we do have one question, a question from Alyssa. The question is, what is SLI?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me go just make sure I'm reading that right. Okay, so SLI stands for, almost said it wrong, speech and language impaired. So yeah, so apologies for the alphabet soup there, but it's one of several categories of disability that in the data sets, they will usually use an acronym, like a 3-letter acronym. So for example, SLD is specific learning disability, AUT is autism. And so that's good feedback for us, because we should probably change that to speech and language impaired so it reaches a wider audience. Thank you. Okay, so let's see where we are. Let me just do a quick time check here. Perfect. Okay, so we've talked about the idea of ED&D and how we've brought these ideas to life. And then we've also talked about how collaboration can help us scale the reach and the creativity of our work. And now we're going to turn to our most recent initiative, which is the Eddies project. So in special ed in general, we've had data for a really long time. As a system, we've been putting data out there for years. Like, that in and of itself is not a new thing. That's been happening for a long time. But we do think that there's an opportunity to build relationships with you and with others so that we can work together and reimagine what we actually do with that data. And so earlier we talked about our framework, which is awareness, action, and scale. One question that we have when we think about data is, what would it look like if we built a system of collaboratively decision making and action using this exact framework? And we think that it could look something like this. So awareness, how might we use data to build a shared understanding about which communities in our systems aren't being heard? Action, how might we act on this data by sharing this information, building meaningful training experiences, and engaging our communities? And then finally, scale, how might we analyze Eddies data alongside other data sources, like the data tools that the system improvement leads are building, in the statewide system of support, to build a full analytic picture of our students that depends on multiple data sources, not just one. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to actually show you the data tool itself, but I want to give you a little bit of context about what the whole idea is behind the data tool. I'm sure that a few of you, or many of you, know that we get these official disproportionality data reports from CDE 1 to 2 times a year. And usually, so we get those at the end of the year, and when we adjust the way that we serve students based on that data, we do that with the assumption that the assumptions of the data will sort of hold true, for the rest of the year. That's kind of the way you have to do it if you just get a checkpoint 1 to 2 times a year, is you're sort of dependent on that. And so we're trying to expand that by using the Eddies tool to give estimates of that data earlier, and then as often as SELPA leadership needs to be able to support their equity efforts as they get closer and closer to the official disproportionality reporting. And so one way to think about this is, what Eddies does is it takes local data and then uses an algorithm to take that data and predict what the end of year scores are likely to be in any particular student and disability category. This is an example of the data tool's output, which is an estimate of the end of year disproportionality metrics. SELPA administrators can view these as early and as often as their strategy for promoting equity requires. And there's no need to upload any data, because Eddies draws its data directly from SACE, like not all of it, but 80 to 90% of it is all SACE data. And so everything happens automatically, as the internet says. There's no uploads or anything like that. If you have a SACE account, then and you are a SELPA administrator, that data is there and available for you. In fact, as an illustration that we can't actually, in the same way that we can't see your SACE data unless you're one of our LEAs, we also can't see your EDDIES data. So that should gives you a sense of how tightly integrated the EDDIES system is with the SACE data itself. Okay, so let's show you the data tools. So I'm just going to move some windows here really quick so you can see everything, and then let's have a look. Move this down here. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it's like to log in and navigate to your indicator 10 reports, and I'm going to show you where to find the risk ratio scores. And as we work through this, I know there'll probably be some questions, so drop your questions in the Q&A, and then we'll get those answered after the demonstration. So first, the login. If you have a SACE administrator level login, you don't have any additional steps to get set up. You are ready to go. So let me just demonstrate that for you. Okay, so this is my SACE login that I use when I look. My self-administrator SACE login is the exact same thing. You know, again, no additional steps, and then you'll see that you can use that to sign in, and then that works. This is the home page, and on the home page we have a dashboard that gives you 6 kinds of descriptive statistics. Those are the count of students by race, the count of students by gender, the count of students by disability. Down here is the count of students with IEPs by race group, and then you've got the count of students and total enrollment, and finally a comparison of risk ratio scores. And these visualizations help you get a sense of how students make up your population by different demographic categories. And from here, it's 2 steps to get to your indicator 10 reports. The first is you have to pick your district. And so these are our South County SELPA LEAs. I'm going to pick Coronado, and then I'm going to pick the Dispro report, which will take you to the indicator 10 reporting. Okay, so on the reports page, you'll find your indicator 10 estimates. The risk ratio column, that's this one right here, is an estimate of what your risk ratio score might be at the end of the school year, given your current SACE data. And so just an example, we'll interpret this. In this district, African-American students are identified as specific learning disabilities. So Alyssa, the question earlier about the acronyms, this is sort of another illustration of that. That rate is 1.98, so almost 2 times the rate of all other race groups in that school district. And down below, you see the same information, except for visualize in a plot. And in this plot, the light blue dot represents what the model thinks is sort of the lowest likely risk ratio score you might see at the end of the school year based on your current data. The purple dot represents the highest estimated risk ratio score we think you might see, or the model thinks you might see at the end of the school year. And then there is a red vertical line for the CDE's threshold of risk ratio score 3. Susan says Eddie is my new fave guy. Thank you. He is also our new fave guy. Okay, so what else do we have? EDDIES is a decision-making support system, and it's not just a data tool. So in the help section, you'll find some guidance and interpretation, and also a data dictionary. So that's up here in the menu. I'll just go there right now so you can see it. And so you'll see here that there is some information about interpretation and also how to talk about it person to person, and then a data dictionary so that you can see what each of the columns mean. Okay, so back to the slides. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so now you have a sense of how the data tool works. Right now we're working with Shasta to test it out. We're at the tail end of our testing period, and then pretty soon we're going to be bringing in more SELPAs. We are a small team, and we want to make sure that the experience with this is not only useful, but also positive, and such that it helps you build community with other people who are using it. So our rollout is a relatively slow rollout, but we are expanding pretty soon because our testing with Shasta is about to end. So we're going to be opening up pretty soon. Okay, I just threw a lot of information at you. So I'm going to just take a breather. I'm going to have a sip of coffee. I'm going to check the chat, and I'm also going to just peek at the Q&A here to see if there's anything. Okay, I've got some questions. Perfect. Okay. So Lucky asks, how does Eddies obtain the general ed population number? Okay, so earlier I said that most of the data comes from SACE, and it's like 80 to 90% of the data comes from SACE. The rest of it comes from data that is easily available to us. So DataQuest is one that we use for total enrollment. And then we also have a data set that CDE gives us for statewide disability counts. That's what we use for the alternate risk ratio estimates. A little bit about that I think might be interesting in this crowd is that the whole idea of Eddies is to use data to make these predictions that is easy for us to get. And the reason why is because if it's easy for us to get, then that means that we can crank these estimates out more frequently, which is the whole idea. The downside to that, of course, is because we're using a slightly different procedure than what CDE does. Those risk ratio scores, if we just reported those on their own, will be slightly different. And so that's where the algorithm comes in. It's trained on historical data about how well our local computations match what CDE eventually reported at the end of the year. And that's how we get that range of likely estimates. So that's a great question, Lucky. Jenny asks, will districts be able to see the Eddies data tool? You kept saying SELPA. Yep. Okay, good question. So right now, I don't know how long this will stay like this, but right now the plan is for SELPA level administrators to access Eddies directly. They're kind of the primary audience, but a lot of our work, as you'll see later, is about collaborating with SELPAs to build routines that gets this information out on some regular basis. There is still some conversation about like how much wider the tool should be used by folks outside of SELPA. So that is a conversation, but for now, as part of the slower rollout, it is beginning with SELPA leadership. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, from Anonymous, is Eddies geared more towards SELPA or LEA as a data tool? Yes, a similar question to Jenny. Can it be used by any level of SPED to track disparate data throughout the year due to CDE? So right now it's SELPA leadership, but we're hearing the message loud and clear, and it's always you'll see a little bit later that one of our core values is none of any of this stuff matters unless we can act on it. In order for people to act on it, they have to see it. And so we message pretty hard with the folks that we work with that the whole point of Eddies is to be able to relieve them of the work of sort of computing these themselves so that they can then focus on the work of communicating the data. And so that is something that's super important to us. Laura asked, will there be a cost? No, there's no cost. We're a grant funded program through CDE, so no cost. Is it possible to get screen captures of the dashboard interface you showed, showing the graphs and overview risk ratios? I'd like to show my directors. Very interesting. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, let me, in fact, I think I have some. So Adrian, if you don't mind, if we could just take a note, we'll take some screenshots of the demo. And then Pamela, if you could shoot Adrian a private message with how to reach you, we'll get that out to you. Look at these questions. Okay. You're welcome, Pamela. All right, so back to the talk. Arrange my windows. Okay, let's put this one up here. Okay, so what's next for Eddies? So 4 things that I want to share. SELPAs who don't use SACE. So this is SACE has a lot of coverage across California, but there are some SELPAs who don't use SACE. And so that's been on our mind. And it's something that we're just trying to carefully design what that experience should be like. One of the things that we are trialing is really sort of an exploration of what would it be like if a SELPA who was not on SACE um, had a data sharing agreement with us where they gave us a student level data set, and then we used, so I've got a local version of the model. It's actually a couple of versions ahead that just lives on my laptop that we use for our LEAs. What would it be like if a SELPA gave us their data under an agreement, and then we can crank out reports for them on some at least semi-regular basis? Would that be helpful? And so that's sort of one thing that we're exploring. The second thing, and so by the way, if you're interested in that, have yourself get in touch with us, because we're looking for folks to be able to explore what that procedure can be like. The second is easier access directly from SACE. We want for folks to be able to get to the data tool from within SACE instead of having to go to a separate website. So that's something that we've been trying to discuss and design also. Third is analytic supports for more indicators. So we are a very, like, we really wanted to carefully work through indicator 10 and get that in front of a lot of people and see what that experience was like, and see what sort of supports we needed to build around it to make that experience a full analysis support experience. And we feel like we've learned a lot there. And so now we're going to be turning our attention to trying to replicate that experience across different indicators. So that's a thing that we've been thinking about. And then, as always, under the hood improvements, it's the way that we work is like these predictions need to be accurate. And so we are constantly testing the accuracy and also looking to see if there are other algorithms that would perform better. And so that's a lot of stuff that, we kind of don't talk about too much, but I think for this crowd, good to know that that's sort of part of our workflow. Okay. I'm going to do a really quick time check, make sure here I'm on track. Okay, good. So now let's turn to the other parts of the Eddies project. Data tools are just that, they're just tools. They aren't decisions on their own, and they are definitely not good decisions on their own, but instead they are part of what Dr. Alex Bowers from Columbia University calls your decision-making support system. And so I want to share a little bit more about what I mean by that. So here's what I mean. So you have the data tool, you have the Eddies data tool, and our philosophy is that the Eddies data tool has to be purpose-built to play a part in preventing disproportionality. And if it doesn't do that, then we haven't designed it properly. And if it does a bunch of other fancy things that don't help with that or help for the experience for that, then we seriously consider not including those. But even just having a tool like Eddies that's got like an algorithm and sort of predict stuff isn't on its own good, solid, student-centered data use. Like for that, we think that there are other things that have to come with that. There has to be some common understanding of data literacy, particularly when it comes to equity and disproportionality. There's got to be some routines for team level collaboration. And there's got to be interpretation support. Like we feel really strongly that these numbers, they represent the experiences of our students, and we have to have some common language for how we discuss it that way, rather than constantly talking about risk ratio scores and whether or not they are above or below 3. That is a big part of what we need to be mindful of, but we are looking to expand that with more student level stories. But let's say that we have student-centered data use mastered. Is that enough? We don't think that's enough. We think that even that has to be surrounded with additional things. How well we build awareness in the general community about this as a problem is a huge part of preventing disproportionality. And then the third is getting y'all connected with us and with each other. We are a grant-funded program, and so we've got a time limit on how long we can work on this. And so one thing that we're constantly thinking of is, when this grant ends, how well have we set everybody up to continue the work? And we believe fundamentally that has to do with getting people connected with each other, so that they can be sharing ideas long after the ED&D project has finished. So here's one example, which is our interpretation guide. We're all learning together. We're going to keep learning together as we commit ourselves to equal outcomes in special ed. And so we're designing an Eddies interpretation guide to not only empower you with the skills to access the data in Eddies, but also to participate in how we develop a common human-centered language for dispro and equity in schools. And so to start, the guide will have what you would expect out of a guide, directions on how to log in and how to navigate to the report. But it's also going to have material on interpretation, and also a framework for data literacy. A lot of this stuff can be overwhelming, even for somebody like me who spends most of their day working on data. And so it helps to have some organizing principles about how to step through wherever you're starting towards the next step of good data analysis for you. Okay, so I'm going to dig in just into a little bit of detail here, and kind of I think what I want to do is give you a sense of what it's like to engage in data literacy in the way that we've sort of designed it. So I want to share one activity with you. If you think this activity would be helpful for you to take home and to do with your teams, feel free to use the activity. And if you need help or you just want to practice together, we got you. Just email us, and we'll and we can talk more. So Adrian, if you don't mind, can you just drop my email into the chat, and then maybe can we also drop the link to the workbook in the chat again? I'm gonna see, I see some questions here, so I'm just gonna look at that. Okay, so request for the screenshots to all attendees. Yep. Maybe we can get some support from SACE on how to get that to everybody, because we don't have everybody's contact information, but we'll work with SACE on that. And Laura asked, do you have an estimated time frame for rollout of state? I think you probably meant statewide. Statewide, we don't have an estimate for that yet. I think we're probably going to bring on about 5 more SELPAs in the next maybe 3 weeks or so. And then a lot depends on how that's going. Every time we sort of do a round of these things, we learn so much about what's working with people. And I know that, you know, it's a little bit of a bummer to wait, but we hope that the trade-off will be worth it, that when we get everybody in there, that it's going to feel really natural and it's going to be productive. So we appreciate your patience, and, you know, we wish that we could get it to everybody right away, but I think, you know, there's a little bit of, we just want to make sure it's right for you. So soon, should be coming soon. All right. There's the link also, data workbook, so it's in your slides. If you want to follow along, you can go there now. So basically the activity is, you've got 2 learning goals for this activity. The first is we want you to be able to look at a disproportionality report and find all the numbers that you need to hand calculate a risk ratio score. And then the second is to understand how all of these numbers combine and are used to compute a risk ratio score. So I'll go through this like just a little quick because we don't have a ton of time, but the point is for you to get a sense of our approach to the way we work through these things. Okay. Susan says, imagine the donkey from Shrek with San Joaquin logo saying, pick me, pick me. This is wonderful imagery. Love it. Okay, so risk ratio scores, your takeaway for risk ratio scores in general should be, they're always a comparison of 2 rates, right? So you're comparing, you know, the rate of special ed eligibility for a particular racial subgroup, and then you're comparing it to all other race groups. That first race group, by the way, if you look at the CDE documentation, that's referred to as the analysis group. That's CDE is sort of terminology for it. And then the second one is the comparison group. So if you hear those words, that's what that means. So here's an example. There's 100 dots total, representing 100 African-American students. And of those African-American students, 5 of them, represented by the yellow dots, are identified as speech and language impaired. That's your analysis rate. So it's about 5 out of 100, which is 5%. Then there's your comparison rate, which is 100 dots representing all students who are not African-American. And of those, 2 of those students who are not African-American are eligible for speech and language impairment. And so that's about 2%, 2 out of 100. Now you have your 2 rates to compare. By the way, this is not real data, just for example. And then you divide one rate by the other, and that's how you get the risk ratio score. And how do you interpret that? Well, if your risk ratio score is 2.5, we train folks to say that in our district, we like to own it, in our district, if you are an African-American student, the rate of being eligible for speech and language impaired is about 2.5 times or over 2 times that of all other racial subgroups in the same district. So in our training and in the workbook, what we challenge you to do is to take a report like this and then to find where all of those numbers are. It takes a little bit of math, but we kind of help you step through it. So first, if we want to reproduce the score, the risk ratio score for eligibility for Hispanic students, the first number you're going to need for that first rate is the number of Hispanic students who are identified for special ed. And in that case, that's 413. And then you're going to need, so that's like the top part of your fraction. Now you're going to need so this is the part, and then you're going to need the whole, which is all of the Hispanic students in total enrollment, whether or not they have an IEP. So all students who are Hispanic enrolled in the school district, and that number is here, which is 4,941. Now you have the two pieces you need for your first rate. And then now the rate for your comparison group. A little bit more involved. For this one, you add all of the students who are eligible for special ed, but without Hispanic students. So that's everybody in that orange line, less the Hispanic students. So that's your part. And then for your whole, you add all of these up, which is the number of non-Hispanic students in total enrollment. So you add all of those up, less the Hispanic students. And now you have enough to make your analysis rate, and then enough to make your comparison rate. And then you proceed to do the math, which looks like this. There's your comparison rate. Again, in the interest of time, I won't sort of walk you through all the math, but this is all in the workbook for you to sort of digest at your own pace. There's everything you need to do for your comparison rate. And then the final step is to divide the two things. Okay. Oh, I lost track of time. We have to end in 2 minutes. Okay, so I'm gonna walk us through the rest of this. Let's end with a quick message, which is the sort of the $1 million question. What do we do with all this? The 2 points of view come to mind. Franklin Roosevelt says there are many ways of going forward, but only one way of standing still. And more recently, Ted Lasso says taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you probably are doing it wrong. And so we challenge ourselves with the question, what can we do as a SELPA that's necessarily uncomfortable, but doesn't, but is not so complicated and overwhelming that it stops us from doing anything. And what we do is we get together with our SELPA directors every month, and we share the Dispro data with them, and then we give them tangible things to do, like use our equity and disproportionality design kit, which you can download here. And then what the design kit does is gives you everything that you need to do, everything that you need to make your own presentation slide, to share disproportionality data, and then do your own call to action with your community to share more with other people. That link is here. Adrian, if we can really quick, just drop that link in the notes also. And okay, so it looks like, can you just to our CodeStack admin support person, are we up at 11:20? It's over at 20. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up really quick. One last slide, last message. These risk ratio scores, super important, but they are not going to be responsive to everyday work. So when you are doing the right thing for kids today, and then you log into Eddie's, I can almost guarantee you that that risk ratio score is not going to see that work. That's not the way they work. They measure change over time. So our last call to action, everybody, is when you see people doing the right equity work, they're working their MTSS systems, they're doing interventions, they're stopping in the middle of meetings to ask the right question. It's on us to recognize that and let them know we see the work that you're doing. And that we appreciate you, and we need to keep that going. We have to do that for each other. The risk ratio scores will catch up and will reward us in the end, but not day to day. Hey, everybody, I'm so sorry that we had to rush there at the end, but I appreciate everybody showing up, and I hope that was helpful for you. Please contact us if there's any way that we can help you. Please let us know. Thanks, everybody.